As you mentioned, monoclonal antibodies, Mark, we jumped on that. We certainly weren't the first jumping on that. One of my colleagues in Central Arkansas, Blake Torres in Benton. I don't know if y'all know Blake or not. He has Westside Pharmacy and several other stores. They jumped in head first, and we're doing the infusion of the Regen Cove as the first store in the state, and just did a great job with that. We jumped in and started doing the subcutaneous monoclonal antibodies. And I wouldn't say that we've had just a massive response to that. There's a lot of providers in our area that are doing that, but it's made an important difference in the health of the people that have gotten it and not progressed into more serious COVID. Many of those who have been unvaccinated. So that's also been a really fun new addition to our offerings. And what's so fun about that in our state is that we tried to figure out how pharmacists could initiate that therapy, prescribe that without having to get a physician's order or to work under sort of collaborative arrangement. And Josh, you mentioned at the beginning how small the state of Arkansas is. Well, I talk with John Vinson, who's the CEO of the Arkansas Pharmacist Association, all the time, and John Kirtley, who's the head of our board of pharmacy, and the three of us had been bantering about for several weeks about the monoclonal antibodies and how to get us to be able to prescribe it. And it just so happened that they'd been working on an angle, and I was at the health department one day for another meeting and stopped in to say hi to our state's head epidemiologist before I left. And I asked her what I could help her with, and she said, help us figure out how to unlock this monoclonal antibody issue. And so we just sat there kind of, shooting the bull for a little bit. And I said, well, Dr. Dillahay, the real challenge here is that pharmacists need to be able to have the prescriptive authority to do this. And I don't think our law allows it right now. And she goes, well, it's just an immunization. She goes, vaccines are active immunity and immunizations are passive immunity. And it was like a light bulb went on over my head. And I said, well, I've never really thought of the differentiation between vaccines and immunizations. But now that you mention that, our Pharmacy Practice Act statute clearly breaks out vaccines as being separate from immunizations. And she goes, really? And I said, yeah. And I said, it's vaccines, immunizations under the authority phrase. And she said, well, if that's the case, she goes, an immunization is passive immunity. We're giving people the antibodies that they would otherwise create themselves through this Regen Cove. And she goes, let me talk to some people internally. And I said, well, I'll talk to Vincent at the association and Kirtley at the Board of Pharmacy. Let's see if we can't, solve this puppy here. And so I talked to the association and the board, and they were like, that's great. We've been trying to figure out an angle, and Dr. Dillahay may have unlocked this. And she talked to the people within the health department, and then the board and the health department talked. And within about 48 hours, we had a decision from the Department of Health that, in fact, Regen Cove is an immunization, just one that provides passive immunity. And the Board of Pharmacy agreed with that interpretation. And in two blinks of an eye, it seems, pharmacists had the ability to prescribe under existing statutory authority in our state, all because we've got this great close-knit community of folks who talk and know folks and can think outside the box. And that's, how all of a sudden pharmacists could prescribe that before the federal government came out with their proclamation giving us the authority to do so. So that's been kind of an exciting thing this last 6 weeks too. That just kind of was a happenstance thing that worked out with our association and board and Department of Health.
I feel like somebody should have mic dropped and the epidemiologist should have said, boom, lawyered.
She is awesome, by the way. Dr. Dillahay she's one of the most meek personalities you could ever hope to meet, but she is as sincere as the day is long, has worked her tail off for the last, 2 years, in a bureaucratic role. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but I just mean,
right.
That's just kind of where she is. She's been recognized by our State Pharmacy Association for her dedication to the profession of pharmacy. I mean, cool. She's really been very, very inclusive, and was one of the big advocates for, pharmacists being the frontline providers of the immunizations at the onset of the immunization push in December and January. So we're really, really fortunate to have her leadership at the Department of Health.
Yeah, that's super cool. Like, I would have never made that leap.
Right. It didn't cross my mind either. I was trying to figure out how to make it work within certain exemptions and getting the Board of Pharmacy and the medical board to to work together, or getting the governor to issue an executive order. And in one just kind of happenstance sentence where she said, well, it's basically just an immunization that just provides passive immunity. It's like, if LED bulbs could go on in, 0.8 of a second or whatever, or faster, that's what happened. And then it's like, blink, light bulb.
Oh, wow.
And we started going forward with it and got it to authority in a couple of days. And that's because of the great folks at the board and the association and the Department of Health. So that was good stuff.
What was it like getting your staff on board with, hey, we're going to do this monoclonal antibodies. We're going to have COVID positive folks. And can you explain a little bit what that was like?
Yeah, well, it's actually a really good question. So we reopened our vaccine center space to do the monoclonal antibodies because we were really sensitive to not wanting to purposely bring COVID positive patients into the pharmacy space around normal everyday patients.
Right.
So we brought our pharmacists who had run our vaccine center for us back on board to do monoclonal antibodies. We opened up a certain number of hours each day, and we set up space with basically 3 theater-style chairs for monoclonal antibodies because these patients are going to be there for 60 to 90 minutes. We wanted them to be comfortable. We also wanted to be able to lay somebody flat in case somebody had a vagal reaction and felt like they were going to pass out after 4 injections. And so we put medical screens up between each of the chairs. We had an air purifier that we put back there. We tried to do everything we could to make it as safe of an area as possible. We got a little higher level of personal protective equipment in place. And we actually hired a new person who was a former nurse who had retired and wanted to get back in the workforce. So we hired her as a tech actually. And that was one of the questions that we just were very straight up with. Are you comfortable working around, COVID positive patients? So long as number one, we'll make sure you're vaccinated, but number two, we want to make sure that we have the right equipment in place for you so that you feel protected. People have been pretty accommodating to what patients' needs are as much as what their own safety is, which is, I think, that's really reassuring. We've certainly gloves, certainly gowns, certainly N95 respirators, face shields, anything that we think will help keep them safe, we make available to that staff who are working around the COVID patients, and they're comfortable with it. We haven't had, knock on wood, any exposure from fluids or other than the nominal close contact that you have while you're injecting people with those subcutaneous injections. I've done some of them myself, just because if I'm asking people to do it, I want to make sure that I'm out there willing to understand what it's like for them to do it. And it's, I think being vaccinated makes me feel not necessarily invincible, but it makes me feel a lot more comfortable putting myself in that position. And we've had good success with that. Billing for all that stuff is a different story altogether, but at least getting the labor force, out there and doing it has been just fine. And we've been very careful, by the way, to segregate. Our vaccine center is reopened now in that same space. So we segregate the time of when we do those versus when we open it up for the general public coming in for boosters. So we have adequate time to clean. We keep that area at the back, certainly off limits to the people coming in for boosters, even though it's been cleaned. We try to do whatever we can to mitigate any sort of unintended exposure.